As much as storytelling and things that seem to work within it come down to individual personal taste, there's sort of an unwritten rule of storytelling between writers which acknowledges that what works in one work is likely to work in another. This leads us to the realm of tropes, which are generally repeatable concepts within storytelling that have been proven in some form within other works. Tropes should not be considered one and done, lift from one story and placed in another. That is arguably how you end up with the concept of something being cliche, i.e., an original concept executed in its original way but outside of its original context. Tropes are as much something worth rigidly keeping in mind as they are a vague rule of thumb to be considered on an individual basis with every individual need within a work. All of that as a general way of saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or rather, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but also consider why it worked originally in the first place and how that original way of thinking might apply to your own work. That doesn't roll off the tongue as easily though. When it comes to writing antagonists and villains, generally what matters most is what your individual story requires rather than hitting broad strokes demanded by other works. That said, a commonly shared factor between a lot of compelling antagonists and villains is them having a defined attitude or personality which sets them apart from other characters and makes them a force to be reckoned with. Hisoka within Hunter x Hunter is an antagonist that is motivated by how the potential he sees in strong people sexually excites him. As far as a compelling attitude or personality trait that sets Hisoka apart from other characters within the narrative, being this sort of potential sexual individual is certainly one way of going about that. He is a great early story example of the wide array of twisted people that exist within Hunter x Hunter's narrative, and just the sheer number of people driven by their own personal desires as what the Hunters Association defines a hunter to even be. But beyond for Hisoka being this very defined representative of Hunter x Hunter's themes made manifest in the form of a memorable early story antagonist, noting my usage of early story antagonist because Hisoka is most well known for being an antagonist within the first handful of arcs in the story, after that becoming more equivalent to another main character. Hisoka is just incredibly interesting to me on the basis of how he walks his own walk. You know, if any other character in media were to be like, oh, I want to cultivate strength in people I view to be strong so I can kill them and get a boner from doing that, that'd be fucking weird. And it is weird with Hisoka. It is really, really weird. But it's the memorable kind of weird. One of the most memorable things an antagonist or a villain can do in my eyes is whatever the hell they want just because they want it. Like, there is a trend in modern storytelling which kind of wants to acknowledge the fact that villains can be nuanced and deep individuals with their own inner world, ways of thinking, and reasons for doing things. Though I find just as often as villains slash antagonists can be compelling for that reason, they can be similarly compelling for being fucking weirdos that do whatever the hell they want because they can. Hisoka is the kind of villain slash antagonist that doesn't want to destroy the world because the world wronged him in some way. He's the kind of character that has something he likes, he knows he likes it, and he knows he's not going to let anybody get in his way on his quest to get what he loves. Hisoka, having this defined sense of self that we would consider pretty morally bad, is what makes him an interesting antagonist. When there is an antagonist in a story who thinks they're doing something good but knows they have to do bad things to get there, you end up with a pretty compelling perspective for a character. Just as often though, a character doing bad things because they want to do bad things and not caring how it affects others or makes others perceive them can make them compelling to the audience because their perspective is so far divorced from a common sense of good or morality that we just want to see what they get up to in their quest to be a bad person. Over the last decade or so, the town of Moriocho has been plagued by a serial killer named Yoshikage Kira. From the outside, Yoshikage Kira is a seemingly normal man, and by all regards, he'd like to make you think that. In fact, he'll even rant directly to you through the medium of the manga itself to try and get you to believe that he is a normal person. The truth of the matter, though, is that Yoshikage Kira is the main antagonist of Jojo Part 4, and he is far from a normal person in why he lives the way he does and the attitude he has towards those that stand in his way. To Yoshikage Kira, killing people is just a part of his life, like getting up early and going to work is. Yoshikage Kira says he wants to live a quiet life, yet he does not for 1 second consider the idea that he should stop killing people, as it could possibly draw attention towards him. When his way of living is threatened by the main characters of Jojo Part 4 Diamond is Unbreakable, discovering his train of killings, he essentially immediately goes on the offensive, and when that doesn't work, immediately goes on the defensive, trying to hide his face even further. To Yoshikage Kira, the quiet life is all that matters until somebody steps within his little way of thinking. Then, he actively, almost spitefully, goes out of his way to prevent them from influencing his life further, even without the forethought to realize that doing so might in fact threaten his lifestyle even more. I would argue Yoshikage Kira's most defining feature as a villain/antagonist is just how stubborn to a fault he is. He sort of portrays this idea that he's fluid and limber and that he doesn't care what happens as long as he gets to have a glass of milk before he goes to bed every night. But the truth is, the second that Kira even thinks that something could get in the way between him and his ability to continue killing as he pleases, the dude freaks the fuck out and shows that he cares a lot more than he lets on. It's this sort of confident yet insecure and stubborn yet fakely adaptive attitude that Yoshikage Kira presents, which makes him a very memorable JoJo antagonist for me. A lot of villains like to wear their attitude on their sleeve, but Yoshikage Kira does so in a way that I don't think he realizes. He tries to portray the fact that he doesn't have an attitude. The reality is, though, Yoshikage Kira is controlled by his impulses. His attitude and ways of thinking, even though it consistently continues to put him in positions where the quiet life he wants to maintain is more and more out of reach, that isn't gonna stop him from killing because he wants to. Even if he has to go scorched earth just to stop somebody from getting in the way of him living the life he wants to live, he'll do it because to Yoshikage Kira, that's what living the quiet life entails, even though it's not actually very quiet at all. One of Kagurabachi's most memorable antagonists is a character named Gichi Sojo. Sojo gives off this incredible early story presence by essentially ranting towards the main character about how cool his dad was for making these weapons of mass destruction. 18 years before the story of Kagurabachi, Kunishige Rokihira, the father of main character Chihiro Rokihira, made 6 magical swords that functionally acted like nukes in our world, but for their world. The Seitei War that these swords were made for was ended quickly by their existence. And while the world remembers Kunishige Rokihira and his swords as being ultimately made for acts of heroism, Gichi Sojo sees differently. He sees these swords as being really cool things for killing people in really cool ways. The first chapter of Kagurabachi presents the idea that while Kunishige made these swords as a means to protect others, he also recognizes that weapons are weapons, weapons are made to kill people, and he is complicit in the death and destruction he causes by nature of having been someone who made these tools. There's an irony in the fact that we and Chihiro know that Kunishige specifically made these katana as a way to protect people, but Sojo isn't necessarily wrong. I mean, he's wrong about the wow, these swords are really cool because they're really good at killing people part. What he's right about is that these tools were made to inflict harm, and they are really good at doing that. So he extrapolates from there that the reason these tools were made was explicitly to cause harm and be good at doing that, which is true in a sense, but it is ignoring half of the picture. Chihiro and Sojo not only fight their battle physically, but their battle is one of clashing ways of interpreting things. By the end of his fight with Chihiro, Sojo does not relent on the fact that he believes Kunishiki's magic blades were made to be really cool tools of death, but he does become willing to acknowledge that Chihiro's perspective is just as valid an interpretation of Kunishiki's works that were left behind as his own. Genichi Sojo is a scary early story thug that is stubborn in his ideals. He's willing to be open-minded enough to hear out your argument before stabbing you in the foot and going, "Fuck you, I disagree." And this makes Genichi Sojo for me an incredibly memorable early story antagonist, not just for the perspective he brings to the narrative, but in how he does so. And as a bit of a conclusion to me bringing up Kagurabachi here, Sojo's specific antagonistic arc of coming to accept Chihiro's perspective is one of the main things that sold me on Kagurabachi early into its run.